After the crazy events of the past few days, there are many theories circulating around as to how and why we ended up here. Some are quite interesting, some are full of half-truths, and some of them are pretty wacky. So I thought I'd add my own voice to that chorus and try and give a calm and comprehensive insight as to what led us in Britain to this point in mid-2024. Now, starting with the here and now, the mainstream line from Keir Starmer and the liberal media is that the riots are just violent far-right thugs doing it for no other reason than to cause trouble. Muslims and people of colour are the only victims, and because of that, he's going to have a crackdown on the rioters and a lot of online speech. Now, as many people have opined, myself included, this is a very dangerous approach because he's ignoring the elephant in the room. By just labelling anybody who's concerned about modern Britain far right and every single person on the street some evil thug, Keir Starmer is ignoring a major dimension of what's going on in modern Britain. This lack of nuance, this lack of understanding of history, the mood of the country and what's really going on is only going to inflame things all the more. And here's a recent video someone put together of Keir Starmer comparing the BLM riots with his recent speech about the ones over the weekend.
Be in no doubt,
I was shocked.
Those that have participated in this
violence, killing of
violence
George Floyd,
will face the full
and the
force
response
of the law.
President Trump,
the police
and the US
will be
authorities
making arrests.
to the peaceful
Individuals will be held
people
on
rightly
remand.
demanding justice.
Charges will follow,
has been an affront to
and
humanity.
convictions will
The last
follow.
week has shone a
I
spotlight
guarantee
on the racism,
you will regret taking part in this
discrimination,
disorder,
and injustice
whether directly
experienced
or
by
those
those
whipping
from
up
black
this
and
action
minority ethnic
online
communities
and then
in the
running
US.
away themselves.
This evidences that Keir Starmer is either quite slow and naive to not recognise his own hypocrisy, ideologically possessed, or potentially some tin-pot dictator who won't allow any criticism of his worldview. And Starmer's bizarre response here has led to many online conspiracy theories stating that the riots have all been orchestrated by a globalist elite that wants to sow confusion and enmity between Christian and Muslim. The theory goes that by causing riots on the street, it will give the state an excuse to implement new draconian laws to stop any protest on the streets at all, as well as curtailing free speech online. With this in mind, many people have pointed towards Twitter and the ironic hashtag far-right thugs unite. As you can see on your screen, you have legitimate people who are traceable back to real people using it. And if you move on a bit and you look on your screen now, people are assuming that these women are actually AI created and not real images of real people. They've simply been used by a malicious group out there somewhere to inspire riots. Now, while I don't doubt that there are malicious groups out there that want to bend political events for their own will, these things work both ways. I myself have been accused of being AI in this channel. Someone said that my voice is AI, and on top of that the videos are scripted by AI. I can assure you that's not true. But as always with such things, you must ask why people say things like that. And my guess is it's something like we live in an increasingly confusing and complex world, and forming a narrative on the world, even though it might be a conspiracy theory full of half-truths, at least gives you some sense of certainty in a mass of chaos. These are the type of theories that are put forward by people like David Icke and Andrew Tate, and although they sound fringe, they actually have massive influence, the two of them. Yet why I'm sceptical of such theories is because such men tend to ignore historical context down here on the earth for their high-minded, abstract and complex conspiracies. Andrew Tate is a particularly good example here because he's the perfect example of mixed-up modern man. Tate seems to overlook the contradictions of his own arguments via a brashness and a confidence. But when you break it down, he's a mixed-race, half African-American Muslim convert yelling on social media about Christian conservative concerns and demanding action in the UK, which he left to live in Romania. And this has led many people to state, well, why do you care? You left the UK for Romania and you left Christian culture for Islam. Henceforth, why don't you just stay in Romania and mind your own business, or better yet, go and live in a Muslim country and practice what you preach? Yet it turns out that Muslims aren't too happy with Tate either. If you go on his Twitter, you'll see many of them as stating that he should stay out of all this because he's instigated the riots in the UK by calling for protests. On top of that, they think that he's selling out his own brothers within the religion. It seems to me then that Andrew Tate, a symbol of postmodernism, is a man with an identity in flux. He doesn't quite know if he's a Christian conservative, Westerner, or a Muslim, and henceforth he's searching for that overarching theory which unites the two. But of course the problem with such theories is they ignore the fundamental issues that are going on at the heart of Britain and the rest of the European and Western nations that are major fault lines to do with mass immigration and multiculturalism. Yet in my view, with all these theories about overarching global powers and conspiracy theories, we're looking in the wrong direction. By all means, there are always groups trying to influence things, but to truly understand what's going on, we don't need to look forward, we need to look back. Now, in order to explain this fully, I could go back about 400 years, but then the video would take about 4 hours. So in the interest of brevity, I think a good starting point is Enoch Powell. Of course, in the modern day, Enoch Powell is famous for his Rivers of Blood speech, even though he never actually said Rivers of Blood. And people would assume you only like Enoch Powell because he hated immigrants and you're evil and far right and you hate immigrants too. And while many would say his stance against mass immigration was principled, ultimately correct and brave, many people are actually fond of him as he represented something else, something that's almost dead in modern Britain. And that's what you could describe as a sort of traditionalist romanticism around what it means to be British. Remember, Enoch Powell wasn't just a politician. He was a warrior who fought in the war. He was a poet. He was a patriot. He was a scholar. He was an Anglican. Within him was tradition. There was a love of England, a loyalty to Britain, and a celebration of our European roots. Powell was famously a skilled classicist. He was made a professor at the age of 25, the youngest in the British Empire, that is. He carried the torch from Athens through Rome to Paris into London, and with that came the flame of Western culture that existed within him. What I'm getting at here is that within Powell is something bigger than simple materialism, simple intellectualism. There's a heart, there's a spirit that we seem to have lost in the modern world. And despite all this, he wasn't a snooty man. He had a common touch with that. That's why the Dockers marched with him after his famous Rivers of Blood speech. Yet Powell is a good starting point, as he was the first major casualty of the ideology of modernity. Ted Heath famously sacked him after the Rivers of Blood speech. This heralded a new era with new social attitudes, the 60s liberalism taking centre stage. So Powell, the traditions he represented and the concerns of many people who agreed with him were ostracised in Britain. However, that was worsened with the arrival of Margaret Thatcher. While Thatcher may have sympathised with Powell on some of his points, her premiership led to a major change in British and Western history. That was the move towards a free market economy which made money front and centre in British life. Now, whether Thatcher's reforms were right or wrong is beyond the scope of this video. The key point is it did two things. Number one, it took away the manufacturing base, the staple of the working class man. Secondly, it supplanted the culture and tradition with economic considerations. Materialism became the focal point. This is the first major foundation of the modern world, where material gain is paramount, where London is separated from the rest of the country via deregulated financial services that connect it to the global market. Yet despite the economy supplanting culture in mainstream politics, not much had changed because Britain still was, broadly, a small c conservative country. However, that all changed when a strange, visionary, grinning man entered the fray. When asked what her greatest achievement was, Margaret Thatcher answered, Tony Blair and New Labour. We forced our opponents to change their minds. Yet while Thatcher may have revelled in getting Blair to scrap Clause 4 and thereby render the Labour Party a free market party, not a socialist party, there was a massive sting in the tail that Conservatives, patriots and traditionalists failed to see. While Tony Blair moved away from the left economically, he swung towards it massively in terms of culture. What this meant is that the Labour Party no longer represented working class men with traditional values, but instead mid-management middle class types with socially liberal values. Blairism was a form of proto-woke culture. It heralded in the modern madness we're experiencing, and further to that, it completely ostracised working class communities from having any political representation. They were just seen as obsolete and unwanted. Further still, the Enoch Powell style view of the world was resigned to the dustbin of history. With Thatcher's turn to materialism and Blair's control of the culture, we see the beginnings of the modern world. Everything now was about globalism and the global market, the EU, the World Economic Forum, the shared neoliberal economic and social policy across the Western world, where national identity and tradition is increasingly seen as bad. And now we can add to that the modern woke culture we're experiencing via the corruption of the universities, and national identity, European identity, is no longer just bad and unwanted, but actively evil to the globalist agenda. And this explains Keir Starmer's bizarre take on the recent riots and the BLM riots a few years ago. In one, a black man is murdered, depending on how you see it, by a police officer. He sympathises with those riots. He thinks they're correct. The other instance, 3 white children are murdered. He thinks the riots are awful and have nothing to do with the murders. Tony Blair's plan has worked perfectly. Not only did he wish to rub the right's nose in diversity by enforcing mass immigration, he actively changed the Conservative Party just as Thatcher changed him. And despite 14 years of Tory rule, all we've ultimately seen is a continuation of globalist-style Blairism. The fundamental issues of mass immigration and identity have been completely ignored, and as you can see on your screen, first is an image of Britain in 1971. It was 94% white British then. Now, in 2021, we see that it's 75%. That's about 3/4 white British, and that's only shrinking. Yet despite the utter domination of Blairite globalism, there is one thing that he and his acolytes forgot, and that's the spirit of Britain. The tradition of the West is not dead. It lives on, in a sense of spirit, within people's bones. My own belief is because people have been distanced so much from their own tradition, it's hard for them to vocalise, but they feel something keenly. They sense that the future's not good. They know that they're being ignored and mocked and ostracised. It seems to me that the globalists thought if they just import millions upon millions of people here, that they'll all become Van Gogh-loving, Beethoven-listening Pride March aficionados. But that hasn't turned out to be the actual case. Further still, even the Brits that are here are sensing that their identity has been lost too, and people want that security back. Yet after years of having that pushed down and told that they're evil and told that they're stupid, eventually it explodes. That's what we've seen over the last few days. The reality is that there are major fault lines running through the country. Keir Starmer can ignore that in a typical Blairite fashion and call everyone with concerns evil and far right, but that isn't going to make the problem go away. As I've stated before on this channel, in chaos is always opportunity, and it seems to me that in the UK, in Europe, the Western world, people are waking up to an ancient tradition which is deeper than modern materialism and also modern woke ideology that can give us certainty and stability in a chaotic world. And on that, a word for the censors. That doesn't mean I'm pro the riots or pro violence. I've stated that continuously in the past week or so. And just a word for any viewers who have made it this far and are still watching. Firstly, thank you. But secondly, there's been so much noise in the online world recently. Chaos, aggression, opinions. I think it's always worth trying to take a break from the online world if you can. Enjoy life. Take a moment to take care of your physical, mental, spiritual health. Connect with loved ones and family. This seems to me to be extremely important in our increasingly atomized and confusing world. I think we're going to need sober-minded, sane, spiritually rooted and sensible people to carry us through these chaotic times coming. Anyway, that's enough from me today, I think. Do let me know your thoughts down below, and if you're new, do consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.